Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. I got the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 in the mail earlier today, so let's do a quick impressions video. Now, in this video what I will focus on is things like, the controls and ergonomics, the size and weight, all the things that I can kind of look at right in the beginning, and then give me a week or so and we'll do a full-on review. So what we're looking at here is whether or not there are any deal breakers with the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 and how it stacks up against other devices on the market like the Retroid Pocket 5. Now this is a review unit sent over from Retroid. All opinions are my own, and they're not going to see this video ahead of time. I did order my own with a different color, which is going to be great so we can compare the two, but that's not shipping for like another week or two. So we'll test everything we can with this review unit, and then I'll also have a retail unit here later. Now, Retroid has been using the same style of box for years, so no surprise there, and we have 4 different color options to choose from. As you can see, I have the purple GameCube color, but let's take a look at all 4. At the top, we have the ice blue color. That's the only transparent model that they're offering this time around, and they've got a black colorway and then the 16-bit US one. That's the one that I ordered. And while we're here on the page, let's take a look at the pricing as well as the specs. The model that I'm reviewing is the Snapdragon 865 one, same chip that's in the Retroid Pocket 5, and this one is going for $230. They do have a cheaper version with the Dimensity 1100 chip, which is the same one that we found in the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, and that one is cheaper. It's $200 before shipping and taxes. Bear in mind that they're not selling that one yet, so it's currently saying sold out. So right now, all you can buy is the Snapdragon 865, and if you ask me, that's probably the best one to get anyway. Of note, here on the bottom, they've got some coupon codes. So if you are going to pick one of these up, then I would recommend getting the Flip2 Save 10 code, which will save you $10. And if you are a previous Retroid Pocket Mini customer, you can stack on another coupon, which is Mini Save 10. I'm not sure how long the pre-order period is, but definitely try out those coupons to see if they work. Now, in terms of specs, this thing is basically a dead ringer for the Retroid Pocket 5, which came out earlier last year. It's got the same Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with the Adreno 650 GPU, and it comes with 8GB of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. It also has the exact same screen, 5.5 inches, AMOLED, 1080p, 16:9 aspect ratio. And it's also got the same size battery, 5000 mAh, and so many of the findings that we had from the Retroid Pocket 5 should be identical performance-wise here with the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. Of note, they also sent over their lanyard pack. This is a $3 accessory you can buy on their website, which will come with all 3, and you can see that they're actually pretty chunky. Like, the material here is actually pretty big. I'm not a big lanyard guy, but they do have lanyard holes on the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 if you want to make sure you don't drop it. So let's take a look inside of the box, and it flips right open, no pun intended. And we've got a little card right here, which has the design on the front. And then also we've got, just some specs here, and then all of the stuff that we just went over in terms of overall tech specs. Underneath the device itself, you don't have a lot going on. We just have a USB-A to USB-C charging cable, and then of course the device itself. Now I have the purple GameCube model, and you can see that, it kind of looks like a GameCube. It's got these, gray buttons, and then if you open it up, it even has like a yellow C-stick button here, and then green and red ABXY. Now previously I did a Retroid Pocket Flip 2 impressions video, and I kind of talked a lot about the ABXY pattern on this model in particular and how I feel like the coloring should be in a different position. I'm not going to go into it again because I talked about it too much in that last one, but I will leave that other video linked down below in case you are wondering about picking this one up and you may have the same concerns as me when it comes to the controls. We'll talk about controls more in a minute, but first let's talk about just overall first impressions. And when I first picked it up, the first thing I thought was that it's kind of boxy and a little bit more lightweight than I was expecting. This thing weighs about 310 grams, which is, around 15% heavier than the Retroid Pocket 5. And so I was really surprised to see that, given the fact that clamshells have so much extra plastic because of the 2 sides to them, it actually is not that much more heavy than the Retroid Pocket 5. And in terms of size, you can see that, when it's closed down, it's actually pretty compact compared to the Retroid Pocket 5. It does get a lot bigger when you open it up, but still, in terms of travel, I think this is going to be a pretty nice fit. The plastic feels good. It's got a matte texture to it, although I do worry with these darker ones, like the GameCube Purple, you can see there's a little bit of discoloring right here. So as I touch it, just the natural oils from my hands seem to be imprinting onto the plastic here. This is partly why I got the 16-bit lighter model, just because I don't like to see this fingerprinting, and especially why I didn't get the black one. So your mileage may vary and whether or not this bothers you, but this is what I'm seeing right now. Now in terms of design, it's a little bit weird. We have a lot of hard edges, a lot of lines here. Obviously we've got this like 25% thing. It kind of looks like I'm looking at a graph or something. I'm not really sure what they were thinking when they came up with this design. Same thing on the bottom. We've got, just lines that don't really have any purpose other than being angular. And so I appreciate that they're at least not like diagonal. That's always a thing that people like to do with like gamery stuff, but man, I'm not really sure why we needed that in the first place. Now, one design choice I like is that they used a gradient here in terms of thickness to kind of flare out with the shoulder and trigger buttons. These are stacked, which means they are going to stick out quite a bit, but they aren't as prominent as I was expecting. This one here is the original Retroid Pocket Flip, came out a couple years ago, and you can see here there's just a big gradient right here, just kind of flares right out, and I've never really enjoyed that part of it. I found it to be just a little bit less pocketable because of it, because it kind of catches on that spot. Whereas with the gradient, I just think it makes a lot more sense. They probably could have made this more sleek and thin, but I like that there's a gradient instead. It just feels like a natural curve. On top of that, because we have this additional space, I feel like the device doesn't get as warm. In fact, I've only been playing this for a couple hours, and I didn't have any complaints when it came to the overall warmth compared to the original Retroid Pocket Flip, which got pretty warm over time. So for my part, I do like the boxier design on the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. I like these squared off corners here. It's not to the point of being uncomfortable, but it definitely does feel a little bit more like a sandwich as opposed to something that's like super curved. And so I think this is actually a pretty nice fit. Now, when it comes to a clamshell device, I think everything hinges on this hinge, and no pun intended there either. But yeah, it's one of those things where people are very concerned that the hinge is going to break. Just, based on other previous products, this is the weak point right here. And obviously this is an impressions video. I've only had it for a couple hours, and just because my hinge hasn't broke yet doesn't mean that nobody's is going to break, but it does feel pretty solid to me. It opens up in two different angles. So we have this just natural angle right here, and then we have a 180-degree one if we push it even further, and then it'll pop back and then close. So that's basically it when it comes to overall movement. The hinge itself has a bar-style design, much like with the Nintendo 3DS, as you can see here. So it just goes all the way across, and then it's connected right here on the edges. And I would say they did a pretty good job in overall tightness. It's one of those things where you don't want a hinge to be too tight, because that will cause too much tension and then often break the hinge. That's something that Nintendo learned with like the Nintendo DS Lite. So this one has a little bit of play to it, but not to the point of being like wobbly or anything. It's a little bit tighter than like my new Nintendo DS XL right here, but not by much. So whether or not this is going to survive, thousands and thousands of tests, I'm not really sure. I've probably done it a couple hundred times at this point and no issues whatsoever. And the sound of the hinge itself feels pretty good when you close it. It's got a nice satisfying kind of thunk to it. Here's what it sounds like under a microphone compared to other similar devices. And so for my part, I'm not worried about the hinge, at least right now. It doesn't feel overly tight or overly loose. And so, time will only tell with a hinge like this, but overall, I think it's pretty good. So let's take a look around the edges of the device. So on the left side, we've got that lanyard hole. And, this is the big old lanyard right here. If you want to use it, you totally can. On the bottom, we've got our micro SD card slot, a USB-C port, which should give us video out. I'll test that in my review video, and then also a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now the SD card slot is a little flap right here, so you got to open it up and then you put your SD card inside. I've already added one, and then it'll just close nice and flush. So no issues with this one either. On the left side, we've got our volume up and down, and then up top, we've got our fan exhaust for the fan intake right here. Now the fan is one of those things that'll go in the full review because it takes a little bit of time just to see, temperatures and long-term play and stuff like that. But I did notice that, playing it in the highest mode, which is the sport mode, it is audible. Not to the point where I would say it's loud, but you can definitely hear it working. And so we'll test cooling and stuff like that. But for now, if you want something that's very quiet, this isn't really it because it does get pretty audible. We'll come back to these buttons, but for now, let's actually open it up and take a look inside. First thing we're going to hear about is that yes, there is no second screen on this device. I know a lot of people are asking for it, but it's pretty hard to implement implement on an Android-based device, and obviously will make the cost rise as well. And so, yes, for better or for worse, this is a single screen device like the other ones from this company. And again, that's another thing I talked about in my speculation video about the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, is why this is not super easy to implement in Android, and why it kind of makes sense that they didn't go that far, especially for a more budget-minded handheld. Either way, let's take a look at this compared to the original Retroid Pocket Flip so you can get an idea of what's changed since the previous model. For starters, you can see that the design is actually a little bit more filled out than the big old space right here on the original Retroid Pocket Flip. We now have our select and start buttons here, our power button here up front, and then also this is the back/home button. In addition, you can see that they swapped the position of the analog sticks as well as the D-pad and face buttons. And this is more along the lines of something like a Steam Deck or the original Wii U controller compared to this, which honestly I always felt like these sliders were in a bad position anyway. We'll talk about ergonomics and stuff like that when we get into gameplay, but I honestly think this is actually a pretty good design. The other thing I think is a big improvement from the original is that we now have front firing speakers. On the original, they were actually back firing, and so this is actually a big improvement right here. Let's go ahead and do a quick audio test right here, just running at max volume so you can get an idea of how it sounds. Overall, I think it sounds pretty good. I like the fact that it's front firing. It feels more immersive, but the audio quality itself could be a little bit better. Like the high end is not quite as crisp as I would like, and then also the low end is kind of muffled, but that's to be expected with a smaller handheld like this. Of note, I did not find myself really covering up the speakers while playing. Even when playing like D-pad centric games, the audio still came through pretty nicely, even though I was partially covering the speaker holes. So in general, I do think it is an improvement on the audio side. Now let's talk about the controls. We'll start with the analog sticks, and these are Hall sensor sticks, much like we've seen with previous Retroid products like the 4 and the 5, and it's all a very similar feeling right here. These sticks themselves are quite recessed, not to the point where they're all the way down, but very close to it, but thankfully there is a large hole here, so we have a full range of motion. And it works out pretty well because these sticks do move quite a bit, but they never are in danger of hitting the edges. Now in terms of clearance, it looks like we are not touching the screen when we close it, but it is very close. One of the main questions I had about this device was whether or not people were going to be able to put caps on these joysticks to make them higher. So for example, I have these extended caps here on the Odin 2 Portal, which has the exact same stick to them. So we can actually put these on the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. And when putting these on, they do fit perfectly, and they actually have a full range of motion. They feel pretty good, but they do not close all the way. So you can see right here, they are not clearing that screen. So unfortunately, if you are looking for something with a little bit more height to it, it doesn't look like they've designed it to be able to be used with additional caps. Also of note, in the Retroid software, you can actually change the LED lights here. So I've got them set here to white, but you can actually tap on this and you can change them to whatever color you would like, adjust the brightness and the saturation, and you can also do it one stick at a time as well. So you've got a lot of options here depending on what you prefer. But for me personally, I've just been using the white ones at, about a 15% brightness, and this has worked out well for me. Now, when it comes to this stick layout and how various types of games are going to play out, I think that's going to take a little bit more time. So I'll put that in the review, but at least in my preliminary testing, even with like twin stick games like this, it actually worked out pretty well. I also love the fact that these sticks are very close to the shoulders and triggers because I feel like I can use these really well. Now, when I actually have to move down to, say, for example, reload my weapon, that's a little bit awkward. But if you're just going to be sticking to these button inputs in particular, it's actually pretty great. One thing I have noticed when it comes to ergonomics is that it feels like there's two different ways to play this device. You have your twin stick setup right here, where you're going to rest your fingers on the shoulders and triggers, and this feels very comfortable. Now, when it comes to playing something with the D-pad and face buttons as primary input methods, I found that instead I will move my hands down so I'm not even touching the shoulders and triggers. Instead, I'm just kind of holding it like this, like a regular old squarish controller, and this feels very good to me as well. The real rub is going to come with mixed gameplay, when you're going to be using, say for example, one left analog stick but the face buttons, or if you're going to be just kind of popping back and forth. That might get a little bit weird when it comes to positioning, but when it comes to these two positions in particular, they do fit very naturally. Okay, let's talk about this D-pad, and so no surprises here. This is very familiar if you've ever tried any Retroid device. They've been using this one for years. It's a PS Vita style D-pad with dome switches to it. Nice and clicky, but still very soft. And so I really like this D-pad. It's very precise. It easily passes the Contra test. You can press down on the D-pad, rock it left and right. The character will not move until you push it so far that you actually get the soft click feeling. So you will get actual feedback when you're moving this around, so it is very precise. Same thing with fighting games like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. This one will give you that feedback as you use it. And so even though I am missing some inputs right here, I know exactly when I hit it and when I'm not going to, because it's all just a matter of skill at this point, and I'm not very good with this D-pad, but I can feel that it's actually working. And then further on, when we try to play a precision platformer, where the difference between going straight and diagonal is exactly what you need, this also works perfectly. And so I've got no issues whatsoever with this D-pad. It is excellent. Now let's talk about these face buttons, and these feel almost identical to what are in the Retroid Pocket 5. In fact, they may be the exact same buttons. They are rubber membrane, and they've got a little bit of travel to them, but not much. They work really well with a clamshell like this because they don't stick out too much, but they still give you some room to work with. I wish they were a little bit quieter. You can kind of hear them clacking right here as I press down on them, but that's probably my only complaint, and it's the same thing as it was on the Retroid Pocket 5. So they're not silent buttons, but they are still very easy to press. Up top, we've got our start and select buttons. These are either dome switch or micro switch with a rubber padding to them, but they are very easy to press down on and a little bit clicky but quiet. Same thing with these two buttons. So we've got our power button. This also works as your sleep button. And then also we have our home button. So if you tap on this, it'll be a back button in Android, but if you press and hold it, it'll be a home button. It's a little bit confusing that they didn't put like /home, but that's how it actually works. Let's talk about these shoulders and triggers now, and they are very similar in design to the Retroid Pocket 5, but not quite as long. These shoulder buttons are easy to press down on, a little bit on the clicky side, but not too bad. The triggers here are analog, so they will go down in a gradient. So if you're playing something like a driving game with the gas, this is going to work well. It doesn't have a ton of travel, but I think this will be good for most types of games. The buttons themselves also have a grippy texture to them, which I really appreciate. We saw the same thing on the Retroid Pocket 5. That's really about it when it comes to overall controls. I think it's relatively comfortable. I think that the inside corners here could be a little bit less sharp, but you only really feel it right here on the bottom. And so time will tell whether or not this is something that'll actually bother me, but I do wish it was a bit more rounded right here. Otherwise, I kind of like this boxy feeling, and especially on the outside right here. Like, it is not bad ergonomically at all. It does have a bit of a flat feeling as you're holding it, but I think that this gradient actually helps in that it gets thicker up top. And so I found this to be pretty comfortable over the past few hours that I've been testing it. I have a feeling that, ergonomic grips, like those 3D printed ones you can find on Etsy, might actually improve the ergonomics here, but for now, I don't really have any complaints. And I like the fact that just overall, it's very pocketable right now without those additional grips. Now, one of the things that did surprise me when it comes to ergonomics, especially compared to the Retroid Pocket 5, is that even though this one is thicker, you can see even here on the edges, and especially here in the center, it is a thicker handheld. It's a bit of a boxier kind of design, but I found it to be a lot more pocketable. And so this is where that boxy design really comes into play for me, because I found it to be very pocketable. You are going to need to have larger pockets, like shorts like this, or maybe like a hoodie pocket, something like that. But this is actually a very good fit for me. It is thicker than a phone, but I could see myself carrying this around if needed. At the very least, one of the big benefits of a clamshell device is that it's self-protecting. So you can just chuck this in a bag if you would like as well, and not really have to worry about it getting scratched up. For something like my Retroid Pocket 5, I've been babying this thing ever since I got it about 5 months ago. It's got a full glass screen, like all the way across, and so it makes me very nervous that it's going to crack at some point. And so I'm always putting this thing in a case and not really chucking it in a bag the same way I will with a clamshell like this. And also in terms of design aesthetics, there's a big difference here between the two. The Retroid Pocket 5 feels a lot more slick. A lot of people had complaints about that. They felt like it was too premium of a device, that they always expected Retroids to kind of be like toys, and this one was a bit too sleek. Personally, I didn't really mind it, especially with this tan color here, which ended up being the one I used the most, because it still kind of looks and feels like a toy to me, just very refined. On the other hand, the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 feels more like a classic Retroid handheld, in that it does feel a bit more like a toy. Maybe it's because it's a little bit more hollow, because it's thicker here in the top, but there's something about it that just feels more like an upgraded version of the 3DS, as opposed to like a really sleek, nice version of the Switch. So I think a lot of that will come down to personal preference and what you actually want. Do you want a handheld that feels like an upgraded toy, or do you want something that's a little bit more adult feeling? And I would say that among the two, this one feels more like a toy, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It just feels pretty nice. So I would not categorize this as being super sleek and premium. Instead, I would say it just is kind of like an upgraded toy, like a 3DS or a 2DS that feels a little bit more sleek and modern. And a lot of that modern upgraded feeling comes from this 5.5 2.5-inch AMOLED display. So let's talk about this really quickly. And my big takeaway here is that it really is the exact same screen as the Retroid Pocket 5, exact same dimensions and resolution and whatnot, and it also gets the exact same amount of brightness and dimness. It also looks to be identical in terms of saturation and color balance, and I love it. You know, the Retroid Pocket 5 screen has always been one of the best screens I've ever seen in a handheld, and I think it just really follows with the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. I'm also a big fan of 5.5 inches. I think that that is an ideal screen size for something that's going to be a little bit more compact, but still very impressive to play. And one of the great things about a clamshell, again, is that when you're playing it, you know, your screen is kind of closer to your face. And so as you're playing it, it just feels really immersive and nice. Really enjoying this screen, especially in this flip design. So exactly what I was expecting here. The screen also gets super dim, which means it's going to be excellent for playing in the dark. In fact, you may not even actually see anything happening on the screen right now, but if we turn off the studio lights, you might see it a little bit better. That's how dim this screen gets. So you'll be able to play this in pitch black and really enjoy it. In addition, it gets super bright. Again, one of the great things about a clamshell is that you may be more apt to take it around with you. And so the brighter the screen, the better, because that means that you can play it outdoors. In the shade, it's perfect. And even outside of a shady area, it is still very bright and easy to see. And so this may be one of the ideal devices to play outdoors. Now, in just everyday conditions, like for example, indoors like this, I've been playing it at about 35 or 40% brightness. And so this can get a lot brighter than you actually may need when indoors, which is great. That means you're going to save on battery life as well. Now, I've only had the device for a couple hours, but I did spend some time, configuring emulators and stuff like that, and then also just checking out the software, and it's identical to the Retroid Pocket 5. So in here, we can go and turn on our joysticks or change our performance mode to the high mode, and we can also adjust our fan. So this all is exactly how it was in the Retroid Pocket 5. And when it comes to setting up a device like this, you could basically have to think of it like an Android-based phone or tablet, and then you just kind of slap everything on top of it. I just recently made an updated Android starter guide, so if you have any questions about setting up a device like this, you can either watch the Retroid Pocket 5 guide or this more updated one. Now, of note, this device will go to sleep when you close it. Basically the same as pressing your power button and putting the device to sleep. So it happens really close to the lid, like right about there, you can see it actually went to sleep. And also when you open it up, it'll turn back on. And I think that's perfect. So if you imagine, set it up with something like Emulation Station Desktop Edition, where it's going to feel like a console. You can go between your systems, pick out your system, play your game. And then when you're done, you just close it up. It's going to go to sleep. When you're ready to get back into it, just open it up and you're instantly back into your games. And that's another benefit of a clamshell device. I talked about this in my Retroid Pocket Flip 1 review a couple years ago, is that an Android device often will just feel like a phone or a tablet with controls slapped on, but a clamshell Android device kind of pushes you towards thinking that it's a console. The idea of being able to open it up and immediately start playing it just kind of removes that Android thought from my head. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to over this next week of playing it, is whether or not I can kind of trick myself into thinking that this is a gaming console as opposed to an Android tablet. Now, I'm going to save my emulation testing for the actual review video. Let me know if there are specific games you'd like me to test in the comments down below, but I do have a couple things I want to talk about just in relation to this initial impressions. Now, first thing I did here is I tested out the screen to make sure it worked with, shaders and things like that. No problems whatsoever. So here with the LCD grid shader, everything is lining up nicely with Game Boy Advance. Same thing when it comes to Super Nintendo. So I'm playing here with the CRT Geom Deluxe shader. It's a slang shader and a little bit more on the heavy duty side, and I'm not using integer scaling right here. But you can see here that everything is well balanced, and so I'm really enjoying the overall look and feel of this. Again, I'm just kind of confirming here that yes, it behaves exactly like the Retroid Pocket 5, which has never had any sort of screen issues. So I'm really enjoying this altogether. Now, one more test right here. So this is Adventure Island on the NES. This game has a lot of shimmering here in the trees, and you can see that it's nice and smooth here when I'm using that CRT Geom Deluxe shader. So again, no problems here whatsoever with this screen. I think it's going to be an excellent experience for most people. Now, I did a little bit of testing when it came to high-end performance. For example, here, God of War 2 with PS2, 2.5x resolution Vulkan backend, and yeah, it's running great. So no problems here whatsoever. Exactly what I was expecting from the Snapdragon 865. This is a chip that can play the vast majority of GameCube and Wii and PS2 games, and so I'm not surprised here to see God of War 2 playing perfectly. There are still going to be compatibility issues with certain games and whatnot, but for the most part, if you are looking for a portable clamshell PS2, GameCube, Wii device, this will definitely do it. Now, another thing I'm curious about with the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 is whether or not I can convert it into a lightweight Nintendo Switch with a clamshell form factor. There's going to be a lot of games that don't play, but I love the idea of having a clamshell handheld where I can play Hades, or maybe something where I can play a full widescreen RPG, something like Octopath Traveler 2, which is not too action intensive. I definitely wouldn't recommend buying the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 with this chipset for things like Nintendo Switch or Wii U or PS3, but there might be a few games that you can play of those systems here on this console. In addition, we're not limited to Android on the Snapdragon 865 version of the Retroid Pocket 2. I talked about it a lot in my Retroid Pocket 5 video, but you can also boot Linux-based operating systems from the SD card. This is my RockNix card right here for the Retroid Pocket 5. So all I've done right now is I've added my RockNix card right here, and then we just have to restart our device and then press and hold on the volume up button when the device restarts. As soon as it boots, it'll go into the U-boot menu like this. And so after that, all you have to do is just choose the Retroid Pocket 5, press the power button, and after a moment, it's going to boot into RockNix. I've done a couple videos talking about RockNix on the Retroid Pocket devices like the Retroid Pocket Mini and the Retroid Pocket 5. It is a really nice solution if you are looking for something that's more plug and play. Because it's a Linux-based operating system, it actually comes preloaded with all the emulators. So all you have to do is just add your ROMs and BIOS, and everything else will just kind of come together. It's all pre-configured. So Linux-based operating systems like RockNix are easier to get up and running compared to an Android-based device where you've got to install your emulators, configure them, and then put it all together. All you have to do in this one is just add your games. Now, one thing of note, the development team does not have their own Retroid Pocket Flip 2 just yet. Hopefully they'll be getting them soon. And so unfortunately, some things are not made for the Flip 2 just yet. For example, sleep does not work by closing the clamshell. You'll have to tap on the power button, and other than that, that's the only thing I've really noticed. Everything else is working fine. Wi-Fi, audio, all that's great. Another great thing is that because we're using Linux, this has the full desktop versions of some emulators, including RPCS3, and we can even boot and play Xbox games on here as well. I did a little bit of testing with Halo 1, and yeah, performance here is not the best. Like, this chipset still kind of struggles to emulate Xbox, but it's always awesome to be able to do this in the first place. And again, this is all bonus to me. The fact that we can choose between Linux and Android on a powerful device like this that's also a clamshell is pretty awesome. So there we go. Those are my first impressions of the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. And so far, no deal breakers. I think the hinge is going to be just fine. And the big thing for me is whether or not this is going to turn into a console-like experience. That's what I'm really looking forward to. As it stands, all the benefits of clamshell seem to be here. The fact that we have the screen closer to our eyes, the fact that we can adjust the angle to it, that we can close it up and self-protect the device, and also it still remains relatively pocketable. So I'm really enjoying this so far, but give me a week or so to do a full review. The big question for me is whether or not the clamshell goodness of this one is going to offset the just overall great feeling of the Retroid Pocket 5, which is my favorite $200-ish handheld right now. I'm not really sure if this one can dethrone it, but we will address that in the review video. As always, let me know if you have any questions down below, and thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. We will see you next time. Happy gaming.